For the next 50 minutes, you're about to witness a conversation that I had with Dr. Iddo Netanyahu. Dr. Netanyahu is a physician, a successful playwright, and a brilliant author. He's also the brother of Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and what he has to say about how Israel affects America and the rest of the world is going to blow your mind. Get ready. This might be one of the most important conversations I've had with anybody in a very long time. All right, everybody, I just have to tell you something. You are in for an extraordinary treat. The man that is in front of us is Iddo Netanyahu. He is a physician. He is a playwright. And by the way, a very successful one, even in the face of a lot of opposition for some of the material that he has produced. He is not just an author, but I have to say this, and I know this is not me just being flattering. He is a remarkable storyteller. I think that when people tell a story, you can just simply state the facts, or you can draw a picture that allows the facts to take life in your mind. And Dr. Netanyahu, in my opinion, is a master at this, especially when you read the book that he put together telling the story of what happened with his brother, his older brother. And when you also just look at his description of the world in many ways, his view is remarkable. You are in for a great treat. And the subject of our conversation is going to be remarkable because one of the questions that I oftentimes hear from a lot of people is, well, that's Israel. It's, thousands of miles away. What does it have to do with me? It has nothing to do with me. Well, it has everything to do with you, and it doesn't matter what part of the world you're watching this from. What happens in Israel, I promise you, does not stay in Israel for a lot of reasons, and Dr. Netanyahu is going to talk to us about that. But Dr. Netanyahu, first of all, I just want to welcome you here. I think our audience is going to be thrilled to hear from you. Can we start by you just telling us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll just jump right into the subject?
About me? Well, you said the best thing so far, so I have nothing really to add. But no,
I love it.
you forgot the part that I'm also a physician. No, I'm a physician, but I devote most of my time to writing for many, many years now. And I wrote novels, short stories, and over the past 10, 15 years, I've been constantly reading and writing plays. And had a certain degree of success, not so much in Israel or hardly in Israel, but certainly in Central Europe and Eastern Europe, a little bit also in New York and other places. And so that's basically what I do. And recently I've become a sort of a columnist. I have a steady piece that I write, an op-ed piece that I write for one of the major newspapers in Israel. Share it with my wife, actually. We sort of alternate between each other. And now I'm appearing in podcasts, it turns out, okay, especially yours, and in English, not only Hebrew. But
Hey,
anyway.
listen, I love it, and our people are in for a great treat. I thought that we should talk about this because it's really important to me to have this discussion because many of you already in the audience know this. Dr. Netanyahu, I'm not so sure you're aware of this, but we have a very, very large audience. As a matter of fact, this interview is going to be on it's going to be on all of our 400 radio stations across the country as well, because I think it's a very important subject. But a little bit of background, and this is just for your benefit so that we can lay down the ground. My mom and my dad were both born and raised in Egypt. Arabic is the second language I was speaking. I've been to Israel 8 times. Have a very, very deep-rooted love for the nation of Israel. I actually was in the country at the time that Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. And it was quite a very eye-opening experience for a lot of the people around me who began to realize some of the implications of what had happened there. But my mother, both my grandfathers were pastors in Egypt. One was a pastor, a Baptist minister for 35 years. In Egypt. The other one was 65 years in Egypt, actually Najah Hamadi, both of them Upper Egypt, very close to that area. And my grandfather, the one who was a pastor for 65 years, his wife did not allow, especially in 67 and 73, did not allow my father or any of their siblings to listen to Egyptian radio. She said that they were lying, that it was propaganda, and the only radio they were allowed to listen to was Israeli radio
Really
because she
amazing.
took her family's heritage very seriously, and she wanted God's blessing upon her family. And she knew that if that was going to happen, then they needed to hear the truth. And she knew the only place they were going to get the truth was in that context. And so, as a kid who was born and raised here in the United States of America, when a lot of people were studying American history, and of course I spent a lot of time looking at that and appreciating it. I also learned a lot about the geopolitics of the region, especially we used to have a lot of conversations about Sadat and why he was assassinated and what happened in that situation. So the one thing that we learn, and one of the things I've developed an appreciation for over the years, is that the nation of Israel, in the place in which it stands, has a dramatic effect, and not just on the region, but it has a dramatic effect on the rest of the world. And I was hoping that we could have a conversation about this, because this is a subject a lot of people don't discuss. And I think it's important to discuss it. And I was thrilled to hear that this was something that you wanted to discuss as well. What do I say to somebody who says it doesn't matter? We're far away from Israel. It doesn't affect us.
Matters very much. Okay, what happens anywhere in the world actually should matter to Americans. No country is an island, as they say, and certainly not America. It has its ships all over the world, everywhere, and in order to maintain its position, it needs to be able to have influence, at the very least, on all, more or less, on all places in the world, and especially so when it's being confronted and when it's being attacked. And this is exactly what's happening. I mean, Israel happens to be at the forefront right now of this attack, but America should realize that it's being attacked by radical Islam. It's it has been attacked for many years now, but somehow it sort of tries to sweep that problem under the rug, but it won't help it. Nothing good will come out of it if you just ignore this problem. I mean, America, is dealing with Russia. Okay, Russia, we know it has nuclear weapons. It invaded Ukraine. Not a good situation. But Russia will never use nuclear weapons because they understand that they don't want to commit suicide. Okay, and we saw that even in the Bay of Pigs, not in the Bay of Pigs, but in Cuba, in the missile crisis with Kennedy and Khrushchev, they backed away. They did not want to go all the way forward. The same thing with China. Yes, America is confronting China, many problems with China. Once again, China will not use nuclear weapons. The country that is behind all that's what's happening right now, the Hamas attack, the Houthi attacks, the attacks coming from Lebanon, right now directed in Israel, but also directed against America, as we saw just today and yesterday and the day before. The country behind it all is Iran. And if Iran gets nuclear weapons, which is what it's trying to do, it will not necessarily behave the way that Russia has behaved. It will not necessarily behave the way China will probably behave. It will use this power, in order to coerce the world to do its bidding. And what is the bidding of Iran? What does it want? It says what it wants. It wants world domination by radical Islam, by the Shiites. That's what Iran wants. This is their ideology. This is their goal, and they'll go to any lengths to achieve this goal. The people should wake up. I mean, the ferociousness of the Hamas attack on Israel, what people know about, and I don't want to even, go into the detail of what they did, but horrible, horrible things. You can see that this ferociousness is part and parcel of the extreme ideology that that has developed in the radical Muslim world, whether it's the Sunni radicals. We know about the Muslim Brotherhood, we know about ISIS, we saw the horrible things that ISIS did, or the Shiite radicals, because Hamas, although it's a Sunni organization, is being supported by Iran. None of this would have happened had not Iran decided to shift also, it's not bring its support also to the Sunni radical Hamas group. What they did should be an eye opener for Americans and for people in the West. This is what will happen to you, and even worse things will happen to you. Had they been able to overwhelm Israel, and they were not able to do that, but had they been able to do that, they would have slaughtered and killed every man, woman, and child in Israel, all 7 million of those. If they could do it, they hope they can do it. That's what they want to do. That's what they want to achieve. This is nothing to them. And if it costs them 1 million people who will die, well, that's a price that has to be paid for the goal of the jihad, okay, in order to have Islam rule the world. This is how they think. For us in the West, it's difficult to accept this, but I think you know that better than anyone else,
Oh,
okay?
oh
But
yeah.
this is something
Yeah.
that needs to be understood. And Israel is at the forefront of this fight. They're against Israel because to them it represents the West. They don't hate the West because they hate Israel. They hate Israel because they hate the West. The main target is America. The main target is the West. And this is what they want to take over. They want to take over these countries. So, yes, it's very, very relevant to America because America is the goal.
It's striking to me because you use the term a lot. You say radical Islam, and I am under fire oftentimes because I go as far as to say it's fundamental Islam. I believe that if you're a fundamentalist, in other words, you believe in the fundamentals of the Quran, you definitely will do exactly what you are describing. And Iran is a much bigger problem than a lot of people think. When Raisi stood before the UN, there's a reason why they call him the Butcher of Tehran. He spoke looking calm and quiet and mellow as he was kissing his copy of the Quran. And I want to read something in Arabic so that people understand this. And I've been reading it a lot lately, but it's relevant in what we're dealing with. It's a passage from the Quran that says, "Wa makaru wa makara Allahu wa Allahu khayra al makarina," which the idea here within context is it's referring to the Jews indirectly. They deceived, so Allah deceived, and Allah is the chief of deceivers. And so the interesting aspect of this is there is a great encouragement in a country where you cannot take the country by force. There's a great encouragement to actually deceive and lie about what's actually going on, as we're actually seeing demonstrated right now by Hamas in what they're doing in Gaza and other places like that. And it's significant.
To take it over by deceit, I agree with you very much. I mean, this is actually what happened in the Oslo Accords. Arafat signed these agreements together with unfortunately, our government that was taken in. But Arafat afterwards admitted he was caught on tape saying, "Well, I don't really intend to live in peace with Israel. All of this is meant as the plan of implement the plan of stages to destroy Israel stage by stage." And we saw this happening before our very eyes, which is why we stopped believing in the possibility of reaching an agreement with these people. What you say about the fundamental Islam is, of course, correct. I use the word radical Islam, but it's also fundamental Islam. I mean, we're not going to wage a war against Islam itself. Okay, that's not.
That's right.
There are
That's
too
right.
many,
Of course.
and I
Of
have
course.
no. But
Yeah.
the moderate or so-called, but they are moderate to some extent, or they have become moderate. The moderate Arab Sunni countries, I understand also this very well. They understand that they are also in grave danger, which is why they have formed semi alliances or even true alliances with Israel. They would have preferred America to come to the forefront and save them from Iran. But if America doesn't do it, well, they have the second best is Israel, hoping that Israel and the coalition together with the moderate Arab countries will somehow keep Iran at bay. But you have to understand, if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, and they try their very best to do it now, with the sanctions basically off the table, they've also booted out the inspectors just now. They're trying their very
Yeah.
best to get nuclear weapons. Once Iran has nuclear weapons, it will have full control over the Middle East because it'll threaten. Can you imagine us fighting a war right now with Hamas or trying to eventually probably will have no choice but to fight a war also with Hezbollah in Lebanon? Uh, that looks that way because they're shooting at us all the time and are threatening our
Yeah.
the northern part of our country. Can you imagine us doing it with Iran having a nuclear weapon and threatening to use that nuclear weapon? And can you imagine the Arab countries will succumb to that threat, and they might act on their threat as opposed to, like I said, the Russians or to people whose ideology, yeah, they had communist ideology, but once again they were reasonable. Okay, Iran, these leaders are not reasonable. Their ideology is so extreme that they are willing to sacrifice the lives of millions in order to achieve their goal of world domination. Not world domination of Iran, but world domination by the uh, radical fundamental Islamic elements. This is what they want. And this is what they aim to achieve. They've been talking about it for dozens of years, ever since they took over. And this is what they're aiming for. And this is why they're trying to get nuclear weapons. You know, you hear all these talks right now about the war, about Iran, about, hitting back on Iran, about sanctions. Nobody wants to talk about the problem. I just listened to Fox News, a whole hour's debate. Good things were said. Nobody there mentioned the problem of nuclear weapons. Nobody. This is
Yep,
something as if
that's
people
right.
want to ignore it, but the world cannot ignore it. And least of all, can America ignore it because they might use these weapons against America. Now, will America preempt with a nuclear weapon? I doubt it very much. But it should at least think
Yep.
about doing the minimum that's necessary in order to prevent Iran from ever having a nuclear weapon. Because if it does, it'll be catastrophic for America. It'll be catastrophic for the world.
Yeah, this is very, very important, and this is why we oftentimes talk about the JCPOA not being worth the piece of paper that it's actually written on, and the dangers of what's going on. We're past the sunset clause. Your brother many years ago made a very brilliant presentation on the information that they had with respect to the progress that Iran was making in the production of nuclear warfare. And the sad part about it is, if Iran tells you they want us to die, I think we should believe them.
I think ever since October 7th, seeing what happened in Israel, the butchering of babies and women and children, the beheadings, the mutilations, and other things, the rapes, I don't want to talk about, they mean every word. Okay, they mean every word. This
Yep,
is what we have to realize. This is the big lesson we should take from October 7th. Not just to destroy Hamas, of course, that's very important, and we will do it. But the big lesson we should take is that they mean every word. These are butchers, these are killers, they want to destroy you. And this is their ideology. Then it's not because they're Arabs, okay? It's many
that's right.
fine. My
Yep,
friends are Arabs. My neighbor here in the community is an Arab. He hates them as much as I do. It's because their ideology is extremist, and this to them is a great thing to do, to kill Jews and to kill others, as we saw with ISIS, to kill the infidels. This is a wonderful, wonderful thing. This is what Allah commanded for them to do, and they will continue, and they will continue unless they're stopped, and they can be stopped. It's not that big of a problem. A power such as America, the European countries, if they would get their act together, they can stop Iran. It's not that big a deal, but they have to have the resolve in order to do that. And I don't see this resolve uh, in the minds and the hearts of the people of the West, and certainly not when you see all these demonstrations in America and elsewhere in the capitals of Europe backing Hamas. Can you imagine? I'm not talking about just Palestinian Arabs in the marches, but young people who are raised in Paris and raised in London, just Western people, young people who are marching for Hamas. This is unbelievable. The West has to change gear, otherwise it'll sink.
yeah, they don't understand the implications of the things that they're saying, and it's amazing to me how an overwhelming majority of the people that are marching for Hamas, even here in the United States of America, represent themselves to be members of the gay and lesbian community and lots of other communities. That if you go to Tel Aviv and they march through the streets of Tel Aviv and protest, they'll be free to do that. But if you take them a few miles over and you put them in Gaza City, they will not live for more than
Yeah,
5 minutes.
well, yeah, they don't understand. Many of them don't, the young people, but the professors do understand. And that's the horror of it all. These academicians, these professors, the so-called intellectuals, they understand very well, but their hatred of the West is so great, of their own countries, is so great that they, to them, it's more important to bring America to its knees, to act against the West, supposedly against these colonial powers. The West is evil. Their hatred is such that they prefer to see Hamas doing what it does and to protest for Hamas than to back the West. And the professors and the intelligentsia and okay, the media. I am sure you agree with me that many of them are not very bright, okay, but some of them
Most
are,
of them.
okay,
Yeah, most
but
of
some
them.
of
Yeah.
them are, and some of them understand, but their hatred is such, and they themselves went to these top universities or some of the other universities, and this is what they received from their professors. The West has to change gears. Academia has to change gears. The cultural world has to change gears. Uh, they depict America as this evil country, whereas America is the beacon of freedom. What would the world look like without America? For God's sakes, what would the world have looked like without everything that happened in the West in the last 400 years? It would have been a horrible world.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the characterization of Israel being a group of colonizers is perhaps one of the greatest ironies with respect to representations being made, because probably one of the greatest stories of decolonization sits around the fact that, the League of Nations gave Britain the responsibility of eventually giving this beautiful country that is Israel back to the Jews for their ancestral homeland. And the ultimate story of decolonization are the Jews being in the land that that was rightly theirs from 3,000 years ago, which I think is funny. But the lies continue to be communicated, and it is a unique issue. And you are correctly bringing that up. It's terrible. I want to bring something up here, and this relates to the subject matter of defeating Hamas and the major problem that we have, of course, with Hezbollah to the north and those things. As a matter of fact, I saw the last couple of addresses of Nasrallah, and it's just amazing to see what he says in Arabic without the translators. I want to say this because it bothers me when people characterize the rest of the Arab world as not being sympathizers in many ways with the position of Israel, when in reality, this is my view. And you tell me if I'm wrong. I would like you to correct me in this thought. I believe that nations, especially nations like Saudi Arabia, want very badly for Israel to defeat Hamas because of the fact that they have felt abandoned by the United States of America with respect to the current, I call them regimes policies. This is my opinion, not the opinion of Dr. Netanyahu. I want to make myself clear. They feel like they're on their own now, like you said, and I believe that they very much need to see Hamas being defeated, and eventually, if necessary, Hezbollah, because they all understand the problem of Iran. And I think that's reflected by the fact that you have 22 Arab nations and not a single one of them want to take in Palestinian refugees, not because they have opposition to Palestinians, but more because they are concerned with the ideals of the Islamic Brotherhood, Hamas, and so on and so forth, and what their charter says about nations that continue to normalize or make peace with Israel. Your thoughts on all of this?
You probably know much more about the Arab world than I do. But I would say when you say nations, I think we have to differentiate between the leaders of the nations and the population. It's hard for me. I think it's hard for anybody to gauge exactly what's going on underneath the surface, what they call the Arab street, what it thinks. Very hard to say. You can't really take a real poll in these countries and try to know what people think. Certainly, the leaders of these nations are very much afraid of the fundamentalists, the radicals like the Muslim Brotherhood, which is why they outlawed it in every place. Okay, I think it's outlawed in Egypt. It's outlawed in the most, if not all, Sunni countries because they understand the danger of this organization. First of all, it's an organization that is opposed to any form of nationalism. I mean, they're talking once again about universal uh, uh, about the creating a universal, a full Arab state, a Muslim and a Muslim world that is stateless, which is one of the things that actually uh, brings the progressives or the left in the West together with these fundamental Muslims. This wish to do away with the idea of nationhood. They join forces in this very idea because they're against at least Western nations. For some reason, they're for a Palestinian nation, supposedly, but they're against Western nations. Not that the Palestinians are for a nation
Hmm.
of their own. Hamas hasn't couldn't care less about a Palestinian nation. What they want to do is destroy
That's
the
right.
Jewish nation because it rules over territory that was once controlled by Islam. Uh, so, what is happening in the street of these countries? To what extent they support the Palestinians, to what extent the simple man supports the Muslim Brotherhood, I really don't know. There's no question in my mind that the rulers of these countries certainly want Israel to succeed. The King of Jordan can say what he wants to. He would be deathly afraid. Once again, I'm speaking on my own behalf, not on behalf of anybody, including my brother. Okay, let that be clear to the
Yeah.
audience. He would formulate things, and
Yes.
probably maybe he thinks differently than I do. I have no idea regarding this matter. But he, the king of Jordan, is saying these things for his own people. So he's criticizing Israel and wants Israel to stop. From his point of view, God forbid Israel will stop before he destroys Hamas, because that's of grave danger to him and to his control over the country. He does not want a country that has a majority Palestinian population. Same thing with Saudi Arabia, I'm sure. Same thing with the other countries. They understand the threat, these rulers understand the threat of Hamas. They understand the fact that Hamas is being uh, directed and funded by Iran. They understand the threat of Iran. They understand all these things, I'm sure of it. And they would very much like Israel to destroy Hamas, and they would be very, very happy if Israel destroys the other arm of Iran, which is Hezbollah in Lebanon. So this, I'm sure, without talking to them ever, without asking them, I'm certain that this is the case. What's happening, though, underneath the surface, these are not democratic countries. Who knows what's happening there? Obviously, these rulers control their countries by various means. They have no choice but to do that. But what are the sentiments of the majority of the population in each and every country? I cannot tell you. It's hard to say. But so long as these rulers are in full control of their countries, they would want Hamas to be liquidated. Of that, I'm certain.
Yeah, and I'm shifting a little bit here. It relates to the same subject matter, but it is something that our audience is very familiar with. I've spent a lot of hours explaining to people why the process of judicial reform in Israel, as it's been talked about, is an important one, and why so much of the so-called protesting that's been going on has been reflective of not the general population of Israel, but rather a small portion of it. But it's interesting to me how, and that's just one area, but there's many other areas that I can name, how many of these areas are being used by the West, especially these professors, as deterrents from understanding the real problem of Iran, which that's really is the bigger problem. We have a lot of students that
Mhm.
watch this
Yeah.
show, that watch this podcast. They're dealing with professors on a regular basis that are telling them these things, and we even have a lot of professors, believe it
Good.
or not, that
Okay.
watch this, that have contacted me and said, "Hey, James," and by the way, from many popular schools, even Ivy League schools, that say, "Hey, James, I'm being put in a position here where I'm beginning to feel in my conscience that I have to speak up about some things that I haven't been speaking up about before because the peer pressure has kept me from doing it. The funding that I can get for my projects is going to stop. This is going to happen." What would you say to some of these people that are in these key positions that can actually go back and represent things correctly? And like you said before, it's a problem when you talk about this is a lie. Let's address that. We're doing that one by one, but it feels like that's never ending.
And I tell you why it's never ending. And we have the same problem in Israel. Our university have been taken over for actually generations now by the left, and it's become a radical left in many ways. I'm talking about the humanities. I'm not talking about the sciences.
Yep.
To such an extent that you really cannot. It's very hard to find anybody who's on the right in Israel who has a professorship. They exist here and there, but God forbid if you're a doctorate student in history and you expose your right-wing views, you might get a doctorate, but you won't get a position afterwards to teach in the university. So in Israel, actually, we were ahead of the game compared to America. When my father taught in the universities of America, he taught. Ended up teaching in Cornell. He was the head of a department there. He could do it. Today, no way. No way
No,
would he
yeah,
be
that's right.
allowed to, been able to function there and to give his lectures as he did. Although he was, of course, it was apolitical. He taught history, but he had his own views. Not much different, of course, from mine. That was influenced by him. Today in Israel, this was the situation also in those days. Israel led the way, so to speak, of intolerance to ideas. But this is the way of the left. The left, when it takes over, whether it's a, a media organ, a newspaper, or a theater in Broadway or anywhere or whatever, or off Broadway, or an NGO, or takes over a department or starts taking over department, it eases out people who think differently, because the left, by its very nature, wants conformity of ideas because they believe the other idea is evil. It's bad. It's morally bad. That's how they look at things. They look at it from the moral perspective. They're of course wrong, but this is how they look at things. And to them, whoever espouses ideas that are on the other side of the political spectrum, this is an evil person, which is why they would call you a Nazi, a fascist. They hand out these these compliments to whoever doesn't think the way
Yeah,
they do. I've been certainly called a Nazi many, many times, and
me too.
a
Me too.
fascist, and whoever, whatever you want to. Every time you write a column in a newspaper, you have these in the internet. You have these people commenting, and I don't read these things, but I know what they say. Some of them, a lot of support, also, of course.
Yeah.
But look, this is I would say this: it's very difficult to fight against this. For a professor to come out in a Western university, unless he teaches one of these very different universities that have a different uh, atmosphere, which is pretty rare. But if he teaches at one of the main universities, he would be committing almost, I would say, professional suicide if he comes out and says his true views. You can be a right winger so long as you're silent. That they let you do. I wrote a novel about this many years ago. That was actually 25 years ago, describing the situation in Israel. Okay, about somebody coming from America, and an young Israeli, studied their movies, film, came back to Israel with a script and wanted to make a movie. But it turns out that he had something that was politically incorrect. It was there was a bit there that was right wing. And of course, because of the total control of the forms of expression in Israel, whether it's theater, movie, academia, and media, he could not make a movie. Anyway, he did not do anything. It's a satire, but it's a very sad satire. It hasn't changed much. Okay, so this was the situation, and this is the situation here. By the way, this book, because it's so relevant, okay, somebody read it and says, "I got to translate it into German," and now it's being published in Germany, or it was published a few weeks ago. I couldn't make it there because of the war, because it describes the situation as it is in Europe right now, and actually in America. So this professor, first of all, has to, if he's interested in the truth, has to know the truth. How to express it afterwards, how to deliver it to a student, it's up to him. I cannot tell somebody that to have courage and to do this if he's jeopardizing his work. I would do it. I could not be able to live or work in any place that I would not be able to express myself freely. If that this would be intolerable to me. But this is a personal matter of every person. Uh, but we don't all teach in universities. There's the social media. All of us who are interested in the truth can take part in this. Thank God
Yeah.
for the internet. Okay, we're not dependent on the mainstream media, the TV stations. We're not dependent anymore on newspapers. We have internet, and this is a great thing that has developed over the years, and it allowed us to express ourselves and like what you're doing. Okay, exactly this, in order to have ideas that go forward and that influence people. And I would say the one reason why there has been a right wing government in Israel all these years is because you're able to circumvent the control of the media by the left. That you have freedom of expression in the internet and in a few other places here and there that allows people to think independently.
Yeah, and I think that nationalism is a bad word right now.
It shouldn't be. It's a very important
I
word.
am.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I know that Zionism is a very bad word to a lot of people. which is crazy in my opinion. There's a that's a whole other subject to talk about. But I oftentimes reflect upon a moment in your life that I has always been interesting to me, and that is, you talk about Cornell, and you commenced your medical education at Cornell. But what a lot of people might not know is that you were there for only a month or two. I don't remember the exact amount of time, and you, in essence, stopped that, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, to actually go back and be a part of the IDF and serve during the war in '73. As Am I wrong about that? Is that exactly what happened?
Not exactly, but you're mostly right. Yeah, I was serving in the IDF before I went to Cornell. I did my military service, the 3 years of military service in one of the special forces unit, and then I went to study in Cornell because it was free because my father was a professor there. So, and it was a good university. I started there liberal arts, not medicine. And then after a month, the war in Israel broke out, the Yom Kippur War in 1973. And so I flew back to Israel. I think it was the second plane that came from America. And I joined back my unit. All my army buddies, of course, were there as well. They also had been uh, let go a few months before. So we reformed the team, and I took part in the Yom Kippur War. Not so much with my buddies because actually my oldest brother Jonathan headed one of the forces of the unit, and there were many battles. And at a certain stage, my team joined his forces, so I went and fought with other teams in the unit. And then the war, you were drafted for about half a year, and afterwards I found out that I was accepted to medical school in Israel before I left for Cornell. And by that time, I got married to my wife. Very common that after wars, people get married. Okay, and we did as well.
Yeah.
And then went on to medical school, became a physician. And then in the middle of medical school, my oldest brother Jonathan, by then he had become the commander of this special forces unit, and he commanded the raid to Entebbe, the famous raid that freed more than 100 hostages in Africa and Uganda. It was a very daring mission, one of a kind in the annals of military history. And he commanded the assault force, and or the rescue party, and he lost his life. The only soldier who lost his life in the raid. And I took a year off afterwards, and then started thinking, what do I want to do in my life? But eventually, I decided I'll continue with medical school, but this is not enough, and I want to do other things. And I found that I liked writing, and that's how I became a writer. And ever since medical school, I've been devoting most of my time to writing and part of my time to medicine. And this is how I pass my life. I find writing, I would say, intellectually challenging. Okay, more than medicine. Medicine is a great profession, but I find writing being creative. I find it gives me great enjoyment, and I have things I think I want to say. And so that's what I've been doing for most of my life.
I think you and your brothers are a great reflection of the kind of man that your father was, because you've all contributed to the world in different ways, using different facets. You probably more closely resemble what your father did in many ways, because he was an amazing writer. If you ever want to learn, by the way, about the Spanish Inquisition and learn a little bit about Jews in the midst of that, read his writing. It's lengthy. There's a lot of material there, but it's amazing. I don't want to. I want to say this about Jonathan, because there's something very powerful about him that a lot of people don't talk about. Most people don't, because of the mischaracterizations that are oftentimes made. We deal a lot of people in the special forces community here in the United States of America, and many people look to him as an example of what real leadership looks like, especially when they start to read the interviews and the statements that have been released about what really happened over there. A lot of people
When you're
don't know
saying
this
you're
about your
saying
brother.
Jonathan, you're talking about my oldest brother Jonathan,
Your
who
oldest
commanded
brother.
who commanded the raid. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of people don't know this, but he may still be the only person in history, as I believe he was a lieutenant commander, to actually sit down with a member of the Knesset to advise on whether or not this operation should be proceeded forward.
No, actually, he was, yeah, he was a lieutenant colonel. He commanded the unit, and he was asked by then defense minister, that was Shimon Peres at that time.
It's
The
amazing.
prime minister was Yitzhak Rabin, and this was a very risky operation. And some people in the Israeli army did not think it was advisable to go ahead with it. But Peres seemed to tilt for it, but he wasn't sure. And so he actually called Yoni for a one-on-one meeting in his office in Tel Aviv. And yeah, they had a tete-a-tete, one-on-one meeting where the defense minister sits down with the lieutenant colonel, unheard of. And wanted to know from him was, will this mission succeed? Is it doable? And they sat for about half an hour, and Yoni apparently convinced him that it was not only doable, it will succeed enormously, that there will be very few casualties among the hostages, and that he was all for it. Perez said that this gave him great confidence to go ahead in recommending the mission to the government. This we have on record. Both Perez said this, and other people who knew that Yoni had entered the room, who saw him being called to Perez and entering the room. And this thing indeed happened. It's a remarkable thing, but there are many remarkable things about the about the operation. I wrote a book about it. It's called Yoni's Last Battle. I researched the raid for many years. I interviewed the participants, and that's the book that came out. And it's, I would say, unfortunately, it's probably the only book around that tells the real story of what happened in this remarkable, remarkable raid. But Yoni, yeah, Yoni has been a great influence on the Israelis and I think other people. His book of letters, especially, a remarkable book of letters that was published 45 years ago, still
Yeah.
selling. Okay, and it has influenced many people. And I would say the makeup of the Israeli of the IDF right now, in terms of I would say the spirit of the soldiers, in some ways, I think I've been told by many soldiers, has been influenced by the book of letters that they read, the letters of Yoni.
Yeah, who recommended me reading this many, many years ago was a guy who was our tour guide in Israel. He's become a very good friend of mine now, David Tal, who was a major in the IDF and a tank commander. And he told me many years ago, he said, read those memoirs, the organization of those writings, and it's remarkable. And listen, in your story, it's amazing because you learn a lot of facts that a lot of people don't even realize. Like, for example, just the courage and the bravery of the French pilot that actually was there and didn't abandon him and his crew didn't abandon anything, and how your brother handled the situation that he did, going in as brave as they were. There were only 3 casualties, not counting your brother, of course, being the most tragic in many ways, but it's amazing to see how successful they were in this operation. And many of the operations that followed were definitely inspired by the courage and the bravery of your brother, and the contribution he makes is inspiring.
The French pilot, it's no chance that he acted so bravely. He was a fighter pilot for the Free French Army in World War II. Okay.
It's amazing.
And you can see obviously the force of personality, able to convince the whole crew, the stewardesses and everybody, to stay with the Jewish hostages. They could have rescued themselves and flown off to Paris. Sort of, I would say, an exemplar of Europe at its best. Okay, not maybe not too many people right now are similar. He died not too long ago, by the way. Michel Bacos was his name. Anyway, no, it's an amazing story. But what's I think amazing also in Israel is you could see, we had all these demonstrations. Never mind, it was many people, a few people, but many people did follow the demonstrations, and they went to the streets and they shouted and they talked. They said that they will not serve in the army anymore,
Yeah.
and people thought that Israel was crumbling before their very eyes. They called for not to make investments in Israel. Supposedly, there's going to be a dictatorship, a government. Oh, nonsense! I don't want to go into that into political
Yeah.
reform. But so people thought that the country, that's it, it's unraveling, that the whole Zionist idea is unraveling. But within hours of October 7th, of the attack that started, everything changed. The national sentiment that's there, we're talking about nationalism that has a bad name, but it shouldn't have a bad name.
That's
The
right.
national
Amen.
sentiment and Zionism was there under the surface all the time, and it burst forward and sort of uh, tore the shackles that were put on it. And you can see how these soldiers uh, all came to the army. People who were not even called came to the army, and they're now in Gaza, and will be fought Hamas, and will be fighting Hamas until it's being destroyed, and if necessary, will fight in Lebanon without any reservations, understanding that there's no other place for the Jewish people except for the land of Israel. So all these things that were talked about in the media and all these sentiments and the post-Zionism, it was all surface deep. It's all surface deep. Everything changed, and the truth, the underlying truth, has been shown to be what it is on the day, that horrible Saturday of October 7th. Look, nationalism, of course, has a bad rap because of the Nazis. Okay, because Nazis, national socialism. Okay, they don't mention the word socialism, by the way. They only talk about nationalism. Now, of course, you can take any ideology to an extreme, and you can take the nationalism to an extreme into pathological nationalism, which is what the Nazis did. But without nationalism is a fine sentiment. This is the sentiment that you owe allegiance to your country. This is the one thing that ensures, I think, liberty, ensures freedom, the fact that you feel part of a community, the fact that you want to preserve the freedoms of that community, of your nation. Nationalism is a great, great sentiment, and America understood this all along. When I went to school in America as a youngster, I was in America for a few years. I remember I didn't do it because I was an Israeli, but they all stood up every morning, a pledge of allegiance to the flag of America and to the republic for which is, I know it by heart, although I never said it, okay, because I did not pledge my allegiance to America. And they sang the national anthem every day. America at that time knew that it's very important to uh, foster this national sentiment
Hmm.
in order for the country to survive. And that has been undermined. That has been undermined in America. It has been undermined in Europe, unfortunately. But some people who want their countries to be unique country which they feel they can fight for and they can defend and they want to understand that they have to buck this trend. And so this is what happened in England or in Britain. This is what's happening in other countries in Europe. I don't think nationalism will be destroyed despite all the attempts at doing so. And if there's one thing that will allow or will bring the West to eventually confront this horror of Islam fundamentalism, is the national sentiment which will bring about the freedom of these countries. So nationalism has a bad name, but wrongly so. Normal
Yeah.
nationalism should not have a bad name. Pathological nationalism, of course, should have a bad name.
Yeah. Well, the pathology of the nationalism that we saw in Nazi Germany came from actually really a hatred of the nation in and of itself. And if there were true nationalists that were doing what they were supposed to be doing, we wouldn't have seen what we saw in Nazi Germany, because there would have been an accountability and there would have been a love for the contributions of the Jews in Germany at the time. My wife, who is half German, to hear the stories of her grandmother talking about some of this stuff. And what's really interesting is there were many Germans that saw the value of the Jewish community and the Jews in their nation and the contributions that Jews made in the nation. And what a terrible mistake it was to allow a man like that, a monster, to do that. And I fault many of the pastors, the Christian pastors, that were quiet about that.
Look, they had no choice. Once he took over, he used used basically the SA troops in the streets to take over. Took over by force. He was elected. That's true. He got to be prime minister through through the political machinery, the legitimate political machinery. But once he became prime minister, that was it. That was the end. And then he took over by force. And so, if you acted against him, you probably died. So, or he went to jail. And not so simple. You need tremendous bravery in order to have worked against him. But some people showed this bravery and paid for it with their lives. Look, most whether most Germans hated Jews or not, I don't know. But there were many Germans who did not hate the Jews, who were pro-Jews, like it's true in every country. including in Arab countries. Okay, that's also true.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we allow the hating elements quite often to take over.
Yeah, the contributions of Jews around the world is amazing. There are whole countries that would starve if it was not for the contributions of the Jewish people with respect to irrigation, and there's technology that would there'd be lots of people that were dead if it weren't for the Jews. The contributions that your people have made worldwide, you're a world treasure.
I think the greatest contribution right now, today, is the fact that the country of the Jews is standing up against this threat to the entire world. I think that
Yes, amen.
currently is the greatest contribution that Israel has made beyond all the other contributions it's made.
I would agree. I would agree, and I think that's a very accurate statement. And so many people don't understand what it is to be a Jew because they don't know the history of your nation and the suffering that you have undergone, and the fact that you have a repatriation of your people in a particular ancient homeland that was given to you 3,000 years ago. More than that, is a remarkable miracle, and in of itself should be admired by the rest of the world. And I could not agree with you more. Doctor, we've taken a lot of your time. When we talked about it, I thank you so much for that. It's a true honor. It's a blessing. Would you be able to just let people know how they can get a hold of your book, how they can support you? You have actually many books, how they can support you, anything like that.
I don't have an internet site, and I don't. I just do my stuff. Whoever wants to buy a book of mine, they can do it on Amazon. I mean, it's in whatever. It's not a problem. But anyway, thank you very much for having me, and or more importantly, also Jonathan's book of letters that can also be found, and it's being sold all the time, also in English. And so both these books are available. My other writings mostly are in other languages, of course in Hebrew, but translated into various languages, and less so into English.
I I cannot tell you how grateful I am that
Well,
you've taken the time to
thank you very
spend. I
much. It's been
think
a
I
pleasure.
think hundreds of thousands of people will be blessed to hear the words that you shared right now, and it's an honor. Thank you so much, and
Thank you.
may God richly bless you. Thank you so much.
You too. Bye bye.